Hi, thank you so much. I'm Todd Moore, and welcome to my presentation on turning your game ideas into iPhone and iPad apps. This is a O'Reilly webcast, and if you're attending this live, feel free to send me questions as I'm presenting, and I'll be sure to answer if possible. If you're watching this as a recording, feel free to message me on Twitter at Todd Moore or at my email, todd@toddmoore.com. I've been writing apps since Apple first released the iPhone, and I've found it extremely exciting, and I still do today. So I've been creating apps since they first released iOS 2.0 and introduced the App Store and the official SDK. I was actually writing apps before the official SDK using the chain tools and jailbroken iPhones, but I have since given that up now that there's an official way to actually create apps, and have been enjoying it ever since. And so why did I create this book, and who is it for? I've been approached by hundreds of people over the last 3 years when they find out that I've written apps and built apps and published them, and usually the question is it possible for whoever was asking to build one? How do you do it? And I always answered that it wasn't that difficult. But truth be told, I've been writing software for such a long time, my entire career, that maybe I'm a little biased there. So it really got me thinking, could someone sit down and learn all the skills necessary to build and publish a polished app? And I think the answer is yes, you can, especially if you own a copy of my book. And that's really what this book is all about. And if we go to the next slide here, this is the layout of the book, and I really wanted to start it by teaching the development environment, and that is, Xcode 4. So we do a full walkthrough from everything you need to know within Xcode to how to publish your app in Apple's App Store. And truth be told, this is the guide I wish I had when I started out 3 years ago. And it's not just for programming, because you need a lot of other skills too to create a polished application. And so in the book, Chapter 1 starts with Xcode 4, teaches you how to get around the dev environment, and the chapter will end with a simple interactive question and answer game. It is based on Xcode 4. It's written to Xcode 4. I use iOS 5, but really this is a question coming in. I did use iOS 5, but nothing real specific to iOS 5, but we're building from the ground up, so there's going to be a lot of interface builder and stuff like that. So we'll be discussing that a little bit more. But Xcode 4, you're going to learn all of how to get around the new interface, and we're going to build a simple question-answer math-type game in Chapter 1. Now, Chapter 2 is one of my favorites, and it's how to build the game of Pong in about 20 lines of code. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to dive in how you would go about creating this game of Pong, the classic game of Pong, in about 20 lines. We'll move on to graphics. We're not covering that because we need to give Pong a makeover, and we're going to actually turn Pong, the game we write in that chapter, into a game of air hockey. So we'll learn how to create graphics, which I think is very important for any developer to have some basic skills on how to create graphics. We'll then be adding physics, such as the puck and how you make it look like it's sliding across a sheet of ice, if you will. And, we'll do collision detection and things like that. The next chapter in the book covers how to record sounds and edit sounds, which is also a very important part of creating your games. And so I think that's why I have a whole chapter dedicated to that, because you need sound effects and you need music. And then we'll move on to computer AI, this is another chapter I really like, and this is what we'll be talking about today, is how to create a computer player. How do you create it, and how do you model human behavior, and how do you make a computer that's fun to play against? So we'll talk a little bit about that today. And finally, the last chapter is how do you get your game, your app, into the App Store. This chapter is another one of my favorites because I put a lot of my rejection emails that I've received from Apple. And trust me, over the last 3 years, I've received a lot of rejections, and some are funny. And so I put that into the books to help prepare you because you probably will get rejected at some point or another. And then we're going to end on how to market the app. Once the app is in the store with over 500,000 apps, you know, it becomes difficult for people to find your app. So we'll learn a little bit about marketing and things that you can do, and it's always a popular conversation. And that's what we're gonna end today's presentation on. One of the questions I get asked a lot about the book is, how in the world did you get Steve Wozniak to endorse it? And it was really as simple as this. I texted him and I asked him if he would write the foreword, and I sent him a chapter on Pong, and he wrote me back, and he said he loved it, and it kind of just went from there. It helps to know his book author, too, Gina Smith, and if you haven't read Steve Woz's book, it's called I Was. Be sure to pick up a copy because it's a really interesting read, and one of the favorite things he talked about in the book was how he created this game of Pong using 28 chips, and he was always great at, you know, designing things using the fewest amount of chips, and I've kind of taken that design philosophy in everything I do, and I try to use the fewest lines of code because that will result in fewer bugs and more efficient code. So I kind of started this book, and it was really when I first pitched O'Reilly on the book. This is the chapter I kind of presented. I showed that you could write this game in about 20 lines of code, and it's a full functioning game of Pong. It has animation, collision detection, and 2-player multi-touch controls. So I think that makes for a great way to learn any platform. It's usually the first thing people build when they do want to learn a new language or a new platform. So I thought it was very appropriate to start off doing this. And that's kind of what we're going to dive into now is how to create that game of Pong. And really the secret to getting it down to so few lines of code is to use Interface Builder. And this is what Xcode 4 provides you in order to lay out new views and then bind those views into what's called view controllers. So what we end up doing is we're going to lay out all the pieces within this view, the 2 paddles, the paddle on the top and the bottom, as well as the puck or the ball that's in the middle of the screen. And we're already going to position those and size those correctly how we want them. We will then attach those using outlets as UI view variables. So we're just using basic views at this point that are colored white, and the view that we place them on is of course have a background color of black. So everything's really been laid out how the game's going to look and the pieces are there. We just need to add a few more variables, a dx and dy, that's going to keep track of the direction of the ball, and then we need to have a timer to do the animation, the moving of the puck across the screen. So the first thing we want to do is let's go ahead and move that puck. And very simply, we just need to create a timer. And within that timer, we specify how often we want to get called back. And in the slides here show 30 frames a second. In the book, I use 60 frames a second because that's the actual hertz that is used on the phone. So 60 frames a second is the preferred for any game that you create, whether you're doing it this way or using Cocos 2D or something like that. So in the book, we'll use 60. For this example, we're doing 30. And why did I choose how fast to move that ball? You'll see the animate function there. I'm creating the timer to call this animate function at a rate of 30 frames a second. You'll see I'm offsetting that ball just by a little bit, by 8 pixels, if you will, across the screen. And I chose that because basically that results in the ball taking about a second to travel across the entire screen. And so you could just play with that until you get it. And in fact, in the book, we adjust the speed of the puck based on how many times it was hit. But in this example, we're just keeping it simple. So right there, that will give you animation with just a couple lines of code. You're gonna see that puck fly off the screen, never to return again. So obviously, the next thing we need to do is implement collision detection. Now, this is a little function I wrote because, again, I'm trying to keep things simple, and I'm trying to use methods and reuse functions so I can make that claim of about 20 lines of code. But this function is actually works out really well for doing not only collision detection but also altering the direction of the ball if a collision occurs. So the three parameters that I'm passing into this check ball collision method is a rectangle to check it against. That is to check the ball rectangle to see if there is an intersection. And then if there is an intersection, I'm passing in two variables, a new direction of x and y that the ball will travel if a collision occurs. Now, I wanted to ignore those parameters in some cases. And so what I did was if you pass in a value of 0, then the ball will not be altered in that direction, because sometimes you want the ball to bounce maybe only along the y-axis, like off of a paddle, or if you're bouncing off the walls, you just want to affect the x-axis direction and not the y. So we can do that now by just passing in a 0. We'll ignore that parameter. So you'll see we're using CG-rec intersects rec. That's a function that Apple provides, and it'll do a quick check between two rectangles. So we're passing in the frame of the ball with the rectangle that was passed into the function. So that rectangle that's passed in could be a wall, it could be one of the two paddles on the screen. And then if a collision does occur, we will alter the direction of the ball, again, the dx and the dy variable, if a 0 wasn't passed in. So there you go. That's collision detection, very simple, and a way that we can check if the puck intersects any other rectangle and take on a new direction if so. So the implementation will look a little bit like this. First, we're going to check if that puck hits the left and right wall, and we're going to do that by just creating a couple rectangles, and we're using CG-rec make, and that's actually creating a rectangle that will be a strip along the left and then a strip along the right. So if the ball, the first statement there, if the ball intersects that rectangle on the left, that's the left wall, and we're going to see we alter the x direction to be +1, which is going to send the ball to the right. We do the opposite for the right wall, which is going to send that back to -1. But again, we're not altering the direction of y. And we wouldn't want to, because if someone hits the ball and then that ball goes into the wall, we don't want it to come back to us. It's not a game of breakout. This is a game of Pong. It needs to go all the way across the screen. The next two things that we do is we're checking if the paddles are being collided with the ball. And if so, we're going to alter the y direction. So very simple, 4 function calls to our new collision detection, and that's going to keep the ball in play. That is, if it doesn't, if the paddles do hit it. Of course, if we'll have to add some additional logic if the ball goes outside the screen, goes past the paddles, and do scoring. And so that's all discussed in the book. And it's very simple just to track if the ball actually goes off the screen or not, and then assign a point. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is how to implement multi-touch. Now, there's 4 functions to touch. Whenever a touch hits the screen, lands on the screen, you'll get a touches begin. And then you're passed a set of all the different touches. Now, you have to enable multi-touch because it's off by default. So by default, you're only going to get that first touch that hits the screen. So you can set a property of our view controller or within Interface Builder, which is what I did, is you can check that box to say allow multi-touch. Now, in the touches begin, we are going to first go through and iterate that set of touches. Now, again, touches begin is past a set. So that means if 2 touches came onto the screen at the same time, you could potentially have more than one touch point within this set. So that's why we're iterating through all of the different ones. Now, let's see, once we do that, we're going to pull out the touch point that is in relation to the view, which is really the view is the whole screen. So we're going to be getting the X and Y position of the touch point. And to keep things very, very simple, again, this is the simplest way I could handle, you could handle multi-touch, and that is to look what side of the screen did the touch point fall on with regard to the Y-axis. And, of course, you know, the iPhone screen is 480 pixels. So even if it's the new iPhone 4 screen, you're still dealing with the dimensions of 320 by 480. So the middle point is going to be 240. So very simply, I can just check if the touch was on the first part of the screen, then I'm going to move paddle 1. If it's on the second half of the screen, I'll move paddle 2. And that will, of course, move based on which touch is on what side. Now, there's another handler called the move. So remember, you only get called, the touches began only gets called once for new touches. And then after that, if you move your fingers across the screen, the touches moved will get called. So in this implementation, I can actually just call touches began. And you're going to see that you'll see that that'll work even, you know, if I'm moving or a new touch comes in, I'm just going to call the same handler, and it'll get handled the same way. So depending on what side of the screen the touch is on, it'll move the appropriate paddle. So that, again, is the simplest way that you could handle multi-touch. Is it the correct way? Not at all. And we're going to talk about that now because you're going to see that simple solution is not the best solution because there's a lot of issues that will come up doing that. Look at, let's say, player 2. They have their finger behind their paddle right at the bottom of the screen on the right side. And what happens if they move their finger across the screen, across that halfway point, and then to the left, all right, like a JFK kind of thing, back and to the left? What's going to happen to paddle 1? Well, paddle 1 is going to move out of the way, and then player 2 is going to get that unfair point because there's nothing that says, you know, that player 2 touch should only move the paddle 2. It's whatever touches are on the screen at that point. So that would be unfair. Likewise, if a third touch gets introduced on the first half of the screen, that would also move player 1's paddle out of the way, and of course an unfair point would be assigned. So that is not good, and I would say all good games would handle these issues correctly. And so that's what I want to talk about next is, well, how do you handle multi-touch? What are the best practices, if you will? So let's go over that now. There's 4 functions of touch: began, moved, ended, and canceled. So what you really want to do is you want to assign the touch. You want to assign a specific touch to a specific game object, and you do that in the began handler. Tiny Wings, which is an awesome game, has probably the simplest controls ever. As soon as you touch the screen, I mean, you're basically diving the bird. So it's a giant, basically the screen is a giant button. So not very complicated. And once you release that touch, you know, then the button is released and then the bird will fly up. Getting a little bit more complicated, let's look at something like Wolfenstein, which has controls on the screen. You have a joystick there at the bottom left, and you have a fire button on the bottom right. Well, the way you want to do it is in the begin handler, as soon as you touch the screen, you want to see if you should be manipulating a game object. So if I touch the joystick, then I'm going to only manipulate that joystick. And if I touch the button, I'm only going to be able to manipulate the button with that single touch. Now, if there's another touch that's been assigned that game object, I'm going to ignore it. So, and that's how most people implement the games. You take air hockey. If you touch the paddle, if that's the first touch, then that's the only touch that I'll be able to manipulate it until it finishes the touch cycle, which terminates at the ended or canceled handler. So think of it in terms of air hockey. If someone grabs that paddle in real life, you're not going to be able to move it because they have it in their hand. And so that's the way we're going to code touch the same way. And I want to talk a little bit about why there are two ways that the touch cycle ends. And let's see here. Go to the next slide. And think the best example I can give you is the Angry Birds example. And you can try this with Angry Birds. They handle this correctly, of course. Let's say you're pulling back the bird and you're just about ready to release your shot, but you get an interruption on your phone, such as a phone call, or if you're using an iPod Touch, maybe your alarm goes off, and you know the application that you're using, the game you're using, is no longer in the foreground. What the system does, what iOS does, it will cancel all of those touches. So the ended is for when someone lifts off their finger, and of course that's when the bird should be shot. And then the canceled is when there is a system interruption. And at that point, let's say the phone call comes in, you take the phone call, you hang up, or you just dismiss it, which would dismiss it and go right back to the game. The last thing you'd want is the bird to shoot off, because that's probably not the angle you were really going for. So that's why you need both, and that's the way you should probably implement it. In the case of within the book, and in the case of air hockey and a lot of other games, a lot of times you're going to handle it the same. The ended and canceled should be handled exactly the same. But in the case of Angry Birds like this, where you're taking a shot, or maybe you're playing a game of pool and you're lining up, you don't want it to shoot off as soon as an interruption completes and you come back to the game. So that's why you need both. When I was implementing multi-touch for the air hockey game, I noticed an interesting issue. And you'll notice in this photo, you'll hopefully notice that something seems wrong. Something seems a little off. And that is the paddles. One paddle is positioned correctly in front of the person's finger, while the other one seems to be completely covered. And so this puzzled me a little bit. And because in the simulator, when you're running it, it was positioned correctly. Wherever I touched or tapped with the mouse, you would see the paddle aligned correctly, and it would be in the right spot. But once I got it onto the actual device, this problem started to occur. And so I was a little confused by this, and I actually wrote a program to kind of explore this interesting problem. And you can download the code at the URL there, toddmoore.com/code. And this is actually a neat little app that'll just draw circles around whatever touch points you put on your iOS device. It works on both for the iPad and the iPhone. And it just, wherever it registers a touch, you're going to see circles being drawn around. And in case you didn't know, the touch points, you can have up to 5 on the iPhone, and you can have up to 11 on the iPad. So that is a good little app to kind of demonstrate this problem. What is the problem? If you look at that, you notice the circles that are being drawn around the touch points appear to be shifted to the left, appear to be shifted towards that status bar. And that is basically the problem that we're dealing with in the air hockey game, is that touch points are offset towards that status bar. And why is that? And if you ever use just a regular app and you're clicking on a button, it turns out that it actually makes more sense to do that. And so that's why the system does this automatically for you. All your touch points are going to be naturally offset a little bit towards the status bar. Because if they did it directly within the center point of your touch, you really want the tip of your finger. So, and that's all handled by iOS, and there's nothing you can really do about that. So, as it turns out, the only thing that you can do is offset that differently. So, what I ended up doing in the book and in the game of air hockey is a player that's playing from the opposite ends of the device I'm going to shift their paddle down just a little bit. Now, I would love if Apple would give me the full touch point or the touch area that your touch actually makes, but they only give you a single point. So they're kind of estimating what you're really touching on that phone. And so until they provide that level of access, really the only thing you can do is to just offset it down if you're the player playing from the opposite end of the device. And I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but I've handed my phone to people and, to show them, and they're using my phone, and then I'm on the opposite end of the phone. I'm like, no, just tap here, tap on this button. And I can never get the button to tap. This is exactly why, because it's in a different perspective. It's not in their perspective. And so if you ever notice that by handing your phone off to someone, this is why, because it's really geared toward the perspective that you're looking at the device. And, of course, that status bar is what determines that. And if you do, I just want to remind, if you do have a question, I'm sorry, it's kind of difficult to read them and do this presentation at the same time, but I will be answering all your questions if I can at the end of this presentation. So go ahead and keep asking, and I'll make sure to get to them. The next thing I want to talk about is computer AI. And we're going to talk a little bit, explore a little bit, how do you create a good computer? Right? How do you create that computer player? And a lot of times you just want to model what a human would do. And so that's kind of the approach we take in the book is, we go through this process of how does a human actually play the game, and what are the different states that you kind of go into. And the obvious one is obviously offense and defense. If you have the puck, you're playing offense. If you don't, you're playing defense. So, but there's a few others that came up, such as board and the wait state that I want to talk about. So this wait state is actually the decision state. And this is the state that the computer player will always go into after it's been in another state. So if it's already completed its defense or offense, it's always going to go back to this state. And this is really a state that will wait mostly. And because the computer is so quick, you have to slow down those decisions. So what I did was to randomly pick numbers. So while the computer is waiting, it's picking numbers. And it only makes a decision when it picks that winning number. So it's basically like a lottery. It's just sitting there generating random numbers until that winner comes up. And then it goes, okay, now I'm going to make a decision. Because you don't want a computer player that just instantly reacts to things. You want it to appear like it's thinking. So to do that, I'm just sitting around picking numbers, and that's kind of my way to just kind of sit there and think. And that way you can actually, the computer becomes less predictable too, because it's going to be waiting random amounts of time. Once it picks that winning number, it's going to go into a new state. And we're going to decide what state to go into based on the puck, really. Where is the puck, the position of it, and the velocity of the puck, which direction is it traveling. So that's what we're going to do for decisions, and it kind of looks a little bit like this. These are the three different computer states we can move into. The first one I call board, and everyone's played air hockey, and the other players just kind of hanging out, not taking their shot, not doing anything. The worst thing you could do is just sit there and not do anything. You want to kind of move your paddle around. So I created this state called board, and the computer player will just move it to a random position on the screen. This, of course, makes it harder for you to set up a shot, but it also shows the computer's kind of bored and just moving around doing nothing. And so that's the first state. So if nothing's going on, if it doesn't need to go into a defense or offense state, it'll just go into a board state, and you'll see it move the paddle around. The next one is defense. So the computer will enter a defensive state when the puck is traveling in the upwards direction. So that makes sense. If the puck is coming down towards our goal, then we'll go into a defensive state. And the logic there is just like in soccer, you want to put yourself between the goal and the ball or the puck. And that's what the defense state does. It moves that paddle in between the two and takes on a nice defensive position. Now the offensive state, we're going to go into that once the puck has slowed down enough and it's on our side of the screen. We can actually, get to the puck. And of course you can't move past the halfway point, that dashed line there. So we wait till the puck is slowing down, not traveling very fast, and on our side of the screen. One of the things I did in the book and I explored in the book was trying to be very clever and come up with this amazing algorithm to, try simulating out all these different angles and figure out the best way to hit the puck. And it turned out to be just this long path I took, and I ended up throwing out all the code because at the end of the day, it didn't perform very well, and it actually slowed down the game so much. And to be truthful, it wasn't even necessary. And I took a step back and said, what's the easiest way to play offense? And it's really just hit the puck. And so that's what I did. And it actually didn't do a bad job because with the board state of it always moving around and playing defense, it actually did a good job just by hitting the puck. But I noticed a problem, which was the puck would often, the computer player would often score on himself. And so that became an issue I wanted to solve because as the puck if the puck ended up behind the paddle, it would actually just hit it and then, score against itself. So in order to do that, I broke offense into two states. We have offense 1 and offense 2. And the first part of offense is to position your paddle behind the puck. And so that's what it does now. It picks a random position behind the puck. And then once it gets to that position, it then will strike the puck. And it's very similar to how a regular human would play the game. You're going to position your paddle behind that puck, and then you're going to strike it. And so it actually looks like they're taking kind of a backswing and then pushing it forward, and it turned out to look pretty good. And that solved a lot of the issues that I was having with own goals. So those are the 3 different states of our computer player. And it actually resulted in a decent computer that you could play. But we didn't want to only play one computer. We really want to play multiple computers, and we want different difficulties, easy, medium, and hard. So we go through all the different ways that you can scale that difficulty. And, of course, you can probably think of a lot of different ways to do that. Some of the ways I did was, when we're in that wait state, we're always picking those random numbers, trying to get that lottery ticket to make a decision. We could just choose from a larger pool of numbers, and, of course, that would create longer decisions. So that was the one thing that I did in the wait state, and that could scale between easy, medium, hard. So if you're playing hard, it's going to be making faster decisions. Playing easy, it's going to be longer decisions. All the states, we could just slow the paddle down, and that's one thing I did. So moving that paddle a little bit slower for the computer will make it easier to miss shots. We could skip logic altogether. So on easy mode, I just jump right into the offense state where I hit the puck, and I don't do that, that first step of moving the puck behind it. So it's going to result, in more own goals against the computer. And the board state was another good one because if we're really moving the paddle into a random position on half the screen, wouldn't it be smarter to actually just move it into a more defensive position? So that's what I did, is the random position on the harder difficulties would be closer to the goal. So right away you're taking a more defensive state even in the board state. And so all of those things combined actually resulted in 3 completely different computer players and different behaviors, and that worked out pretty well. Okay, well, that's it for the programming portion. I'm going to get to the stuff that usually is the most enjoyed, and that is how do you market this app once it's built? Again, there's over 500,000 apps. I mean, approaching 1 million, and just the days of build it and they will come. That's over. That was so 3 years ago, but it used to be the case. I was in the store when there was less than 1,000 apps, and it was it was great because you got a lot of visibility and you got a lot of downloads, but now it's not that easy. Once your app gets released, you might get a few downloads the first couple of days, but then it'll just kind of disappear into the noise. So we need to know a little bit about marketing and ways that we can market the apps and hopefully get more sales. So the first thing I'm going to recommend, of course this is common sense, is have a website. But I've seen developers not have websites. They just link to their Twitter account, and nothing says unprofessional like a company that just has a Twitter site. So actually create a presence and be the first to announce it on your website and let Google pick it up before anyone else. The key point here is once you release your app and it gets published on iTunes, it'll actually get scraped by thousands of other websites. And so you want to have your presence already up because you can take advantage of that and you could link to your website from your description and from your support page. And right away that helps with your Google ranking because the more links that refer to you, the higher you are in Google. So it's very good to have that. Make sure you have that set up before you actually release the app, and that way you'll get a lot of free links pointing back to your website. Email is a great use. Your first app will probably be downloaded by all your friends and family, and they'll love you and they'll support you. When you get into my position where you've released over 30, they hate you and they'll never download another one of your apps. So initially, email will work great, and your friends will be your biggest fans. That won't work forever. Facebook's very important. I recommend setting up a Facebook page as well as a Twitter page for your company. I get asked a lot, do you just create one for the company or do you create one for each app? Personally, I think you should do the company first. I haven't really created any other pages for my apps, but some people have, and if you have an app that's really, really popular, you may want to consider that. But I kind of like being able to cross-promote all of my apps to existing users. So having a single company account has worked well, but that may not always be the case. So you'll have to decide that. But I recommend starting simple. Just create a single page for your company, Facebook and Twitter, and then grow that out if needed. Of course, YouTube is another way. It's always great to take a video so people can see the video, although you can't post a video on iTunes. Other people can look at it from your website, and it's a good way to generate a little bit more publicity, of course. The easiest way to take a video of your app is via the simulator, and the simulator, you can run that on your Mac, and then you can just get some screen capture software and record a nice little video, and you can put some titles and stuff on there, ways to contact you and get to your website, and that's a good way to get a little bit more publicity. And sure, Google Plus is the new kid on the block. We'll see how that pans out, but keep an eye on that. Let's see. The next thing I want to talk about is web reviews, and this can really generate a lot of traffic to your app and a lot of downloads. And so news outlets and gaming websites, you want to approach them. You want to send them emails and let them know about your game, your app. And you want to use your promo codes. So you get 50 promo codes every new version of your app. Use them. You can give someone a promo code, and it gives them a free copy of your app if it's a paid app. Obviously, it's free. You don't have to do that. So use those codes. And most web review sites want you to include a promo code with it. So get them out there. And one thing I learned is really any news is good news. And so I have one of my most popular games is called Card Counter. And it's based on the concept of blackjack card counting, but it's a game, and it ends up teaching you how to count cards like the MIT students did when they took over Vegas and won millions of dollars. So it's an actual training game that'll teach you how to count. But there was a couple of years ago, Las Vegas issued a warning against card counting iPhone applications, and they didn't name any specific apps. They just, were warning the dealers to be on the lookout. So this got picked up in the media, and literally every single news outlet in the world ran this story, and they didn't have any apps, so they went on iTunes and searched for card counting apps, and they found mine. Mine was the most popular at the time. And so that got dragged into the pool of other apps. So even though my app, wasn't illegal in any way, I got, press that said, use this app and go to jail. And I got interviewed by so many different radio stations and LA Times. And so it just goes to show any news is good news, whether it's good or bad or inaccurate. It'll help drive downloads. And Card Counter actually went up to the number 13 overall paid spot from all that press. And before I quit my full-time job and started doing this full-time, I actually went into my office and people were coming in saying they saw my app on the local news, and that's how crazy it was for like a couple days, and it just drove a ton of downloads. So good places that you want to go to. I recommend the website gotoats.org. This is a list of review sites that'll take on your app. Maybe it's not guaranteed. Don't get upset if they don't review your app. But it's a good list of companies that will review your app without having to pay them money, and I think that's important. To get a fair review of your app, you shouldn't have to bribe someone. The next thing I want to talk about is the iTunes feature. Nothing drives downloads better than being featured on iTunes. And I've been fortunate. I do a podcast called Tech 411. It was featured, and it drove a ton of downloads to that. And my book is actually featured on iTunes this week, and that's increased the ranking tremendously. And the same thing with the app. I think it probably even drives more traffic. So in my case, I've been fortunate. Glowburst is one of the games I created, and it's been featured countless times, and maybe close to 10 different times, whether it's new and noteworthy or, a staff favorite. And so people often ask me, how did you get this game featured so many times? And even though there is no secret formula, there's no way to guarantee that your game or app will be featured. This is what has worked well for me, was I just supported Apple's latest and greatest feature set. So when the iPad first came out, I wrote Glowburst for the iPad before the iPads were even available for purchase. And there was like a month where you could send your game into Apple, and they would run it on the iPad, let you know if it ran or not. And so I did that, and so I got Glowburst in for the initial release of the first iPad, and they featured it. They featured it again when the iPhone came out with the Retina display. I quickly updated Glowburst to support Retina display, and they featured it again. And then when they released Game Center, I think it was version 4.1 or 4.2 of iOS, I quickly supported Game Center in there, and of course they featured it again. So I think that strategy works well. It's just supporting the latest and greatest stuff that Apple's putting out there. But even more general is Apple wants you to make their device look and sound great. So, and that's exactly what I try to do, is make this game look amazing and make it sound great. Put good music in there, put good sound effects, use good graphics. All of these things will help and hopefully get your app or game featured. Another great way to market and advertise your app is by creating a Lite version. And if you think of it, it's really free advertising within iTunes. And Apple really allows you to publish as many apps as you want, so why wouldn't you create a Lite version? And you can actually monetize that by putting advertising in. It's very easy. And what it does, it just lets users try out most of your features, and it gives them a reason to upgrade. And so in the case of Glowburst, I added, different levels. Of course, you take out the advertising if they upgrade, and then you add a few more levels and things like that, and achievements, and so that's what you get in the full version. So hopefully you'll make a compelling reason, to pay 99 cents for them to upgrade. But even if they don't, and they just use your Lite version, you can hopefully make a little bit of revenue off of ads that you put in there. or even in-app purchases. If you choose not to do the Lite full version and just go free all the way with in-app purchase, that's another strategy you can do as well. I will say that it is nice to have 2 apps in the store because you get a little bit more visibility that way. In terms of programming, it's actually pretty easy to create two different versions all within the same project. And so what I'll do is I'll have 2 different targets, one for Globurst, one for Globurst Lite, and then I'll use pound defines to remove functionality out of the Lite version. And so I can actually just compile them both all within the same project. So it's really easy to manage that way. And then, both the Lite and full version, you can, the Lite and full version, you can basically get, sorry, I just lost my train of thought because someone just asked if apps are free or 99 cents, how do you make money? Well, again, free apps are, you can make money by putting in advertising. Examples of that would be AdMob, or iAd is Apple's advertising service, and there's a bunch of others too as well. And then you hope they upgrade, and then of course you get 70% of whatever the price is of your app. So if it's 99 cents, you earn 70 cents on that. I will say all upgrades are going to be free for the end user. So that kind of makes it compelling to maybe use in-app purchasing so that you can continue to get revenue. A question just came in: is pound defines discussed in any depth in your book? No, they're used, and pound defines are fairly simple, and it's just a way of substituting one thing for another. So in the case of this, I create a pound define, I call it Lite version, and then throughout my code, I will then if-def out certain parts of the code, because I don't want to include them in the Lite version. So that's not discussed, but it's pretty easy to set that up. Okay, moving on. Advertising. Now, like I said, there's a lot of different ways you can earn revenue within your Lite versions, and I certainly recommend, if you're going to go that route, to use an aggregator like AdWorld, and that way you're going to achieve higher fill rates. What is a fill rate? Basically, when you ask AdMob or iAd for an ad, you may or may not get it. So a fill rate of 100% means they always serve you an ad. Well, that just never happens. There's never an infinite amount of ads to serve up. So you can use an aggregator to go between the different ad sites, and that way you can achieve higher fill rates and earn more revenue. And, of course, with AdWorld, you can also put your own house ads in there, which is important. I'll talk about in a little bit. Now, let's say you want to promote your app. How do you do that? Advertising in other people's apps. So you can do that with iAd. You can do that with AdMob. I like AdMob. I use them almost exclusively just because it's so easy to both, one, make money, and two, advertise. And what's nice is they actually have a 20% transfer bonus, whereas the money I've earned from putting ads in my own app, I can actually transfer that over to the advertising side, and they'll give you a 20% bonus, and I can spend that money advertising my own stuff. And one tip I'll give you is you should probably only promote your free versions. I've tried both. I've tried advertising paid versions, and I've tried free versions. You'll never make money off an ad campaign. You're never going to spend ad dollars and then get more money in paid downloads. So, and when people click on an ad and they see that it's 99 cents or whatever, they usually won't download it. Where if it's free, chances are there's a better shot that you'll get a download. And that's really what you want. You want to get downloads. You want to drive downloads. You want people using your app. The other bit of advice I would recommend is create multiple campaigns. Just don't create, you think you have one little catchy slogan and that's all you need. You should really try to create 10 different variations of that. And that's what I always do is I'll start a campaign. If I'm going to advertise an app, I'm going to create a lot of different versions of the same similar text, because you'll find that the smallest change can actually drive more downloads. And So what I'll do is I'll actually start with a lot of ads, different text and whatnot, and scale back the ones that do not, deliver the downloads. So you want to eliminate the bad campaigns and keep the good ones running. Another bit of advice is spending a lot of money fast is probably going to be better than spending a little bit of money slow. And so what I mean by that, let's say you have $1,000 and you're going to use this on your ad campaign. I would suggest that you spend that over the course of a couple days rather than an entire month, because you're really not going to change the ranking of your app if you spread that over an entire month. Whereas if you do a quick burst campaign, 1 to 3 days, you're going to see better results and you're going to get higher rankings. In fact, some people will tell you to spend that $1,000 as quick as humanly possible, because that's just going to drive a huge burst of downloads and you're going to get a much higher ranking within iTunes. And, of course, the goal being you hope that because your app is getting higher in rank, you start achieving more visibility and you get more organic downloads. At least that's what you want. All right, moving on. One of my advertising campaigns that did really well, AdMob actually did a case study on. AdMob, of course, is owned by Google now. And so the campaign I did actually produced a conversion rate of about 20% at a cost per install of 20 cents. So what that means is I was able to, for every person, remember, you're paying per click, right? Every time someone clicks on an ad, and in this case I was paying 5 cents because I was targeting the U.S., and that was the minimum bid to do that. So the conversion rate of 20%, so 1 out of 5 people were downloading the app, and it was costing me, or maybe it was 1 out of 4. So that would be 20 cents. I'm probably doing the math wrong on that. So 1 out of 5 might have been for this particular one. And that's good. And trust me, that's a great number. Paying 20 cents per download is fantastic. I've had campaigns where I was paying $3 a download. It's horrible. So if you're paying more than $1, you're paying more than 50 cents, I would usually shut those campaigns down. I'd like to get it under a quarter if possible. And I'm actually running a campaign right now on AdMob, and I don't know when they did this, but they dropped the minimum bid, and that is, of course, the price you pay per click to a penny. So right now I'm running a campaign, and I've actually got a cost per install of about 13, 14 cents. And that's because I'm running at a penny. But the problem with that is I'm not getting enough ads running. It's not getting out there fast enough, and so I'm not getting downloads, and that's because there's just too many people bidding that low. So that's why you would want to increase your bid a little bit, just so that your ad will get shown more across, the entire suite of apps that have advertising. In this case study, I was able to push my Lite version of White Noise Lite, and White Noise is one of my most popular applications. It's a sleeping app, not a game, but regardless, you advertise and you promote the same, whether it's a game or app. So in this particular case, I was able to push the Lite version of White Noise into the number 3 productivity spot, and which is great. Got a lot of great visibility. But I also, because I have advertising in the Lite version of my app, I was able to switch to a house ad and promote the full version of the app within the Lite version, and that was able to push the full version into the number 51 overall spot. So this was a really good campaign. It resulted in a lot of downloads and a lot of visibility, and so AdMob ended up doing a case study. So I really suggest this is a great way to promote your app. Promote the free version, and then within the free version you can promote your full version, and just hope you capture as many users and downloads as possible. The last thing I want to talk about is how to track your sales. And I'm just going to mention a couple things. I use App Annie, which is a nice website. It's free to sign up, and you can get kind of historic data of your apps and where they are in terms of rankings around the world. So App Annie tracks all the rankings over a few years of data, and you can kind of see visually how your app has historically done. And you can sign up. You can have App Annie track your sales and reviews. You have to give them access to your iTunes data. You can use that service. They will. What I like about it is they'll email you every day and tell you how many downloads you got, how much money you've earned, and they'll even show new comments and reviews. That's appannie.com. If you don't feel comfortable sharing your financial data with another company, I recommend using AppViz2. It's a great little Mac application for downloading rankings, reviews, and sales. So one-time purchase, I think it's $49, and you can just download all that data directly onto your computer, and that way you're not sharing your financials. So those are two sites I recommend for tracking your sales. And that is it for the presentation. Thank you so much for listening. Everything I discussed here is in my book and more, of course. And you can always hit me up on Twitter at Todd Moore. My email is todd@toddmoore.com. And my website, toddmoore.com/book, if you want to get all the different ways that you can purchase this book. I will now open it up for Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Todd, for an outstanding webcast today. And we do have several questions that have come in from our attendees. Let's take a peek here. Are you able to see them in the Q&A tab, or would you like me to read them to you?
Yes, I do see them there. Okay. Do you have any experience with using NFC in a game context? No, I do not. I'm assuming you mean near-field communication. That's probably not available on iOS. Maybe with the iPhone 5 they may introduce that. So you're pretty much asking about an Android phone. But no, I do not have experience with that. All right, the second question was, how does an app like Draw Something send its drawing and data back and forth between the players? In other words, does a developer have to have its own servers or pay another company fees for this communication? If so, how expensive is this? It's a great question, and of course I don't know the technical details of Draw Something, but I play the game. I do enjoy the game. I assume because of the way that you see the drawings unfold, you see it being painted kind of in not in real time, it's being recorded. So I'm assuming they're just recording all your touch points and your drawings and your pen, size and color, and it just as data points, and then they're uploading it to one of their own servers. Now, you will have to pay for some kind of service like that. I believe Apple has introduced turn-based stuff into Game Center, so you might be able to leverage Game Center. I'm not 100% sure of that. A lot of companies will use something like Google App Engine or Amazon Cloud Services to kind of like upload and share data. So you might want to look into that. And one of the things I like about Google App Engine, although I haven't used it yet, but they do allow you to set up a free account and give you let you play around with that and test it without having to pay any fees to kind of get you hooked in. So I'd recommend checking that out. All right, the next question. Are there any special considerations when using GPS? I'm not sure what that means, accuracy and responsiveness. Dom May, are you still in the chat room? Can you elaborate what is vis-a-vis accuracy and responsiveness? Okay. I'll kind of wait and see, but I'll give you just a general answer about GPS. You can basically query your location. You specify how accurate you want it to be up to a certain threshold. So, of course, the more accurate you ask the location services to be, the more battery drain you'll get. And so I think in terms of location, it's really a result of, how much battery are you using, how accurate are you trying to get that. And the way it works is it'll basically call you back with old cache data that it may have on the phone, and then it'll update it and try to zero it in. You can kind of see that when you launch the Maps application. You'll see it initially start somewhere else, and then it'll slowly kind of drift over to where you are, and that's because it's getting more and more accurate data. And so that's kind of how location services works. I don't see you asking any follow-ups to that, so I'm going to assume that you've left the chat. Hopefully that will help. I guess there's a few other questions here that were just posted. Have you tried developing HTML5 app movie mobile games? No, I have not. And I think, usually that approach is great for when you're trying to be cross-platform, and I'm assuming that's what you're shooting for. I don't think you could build a serious game in HTML5. You could build simple types of games, but I could be wrong. It's getting better all the time. It's certainly, a lot of people are trying to close that gap. A lot of people want to write once and be able to use it on both their Android and iOS platforms. And there's APIs out there that help you to do that. And maybe you're not even asking a specific game question, but yeah, I think you could do some of that. I prefer going native at all times, just because you want it to look like it's a native app. You want it to perform. You don't want it to lag. And I've seen HTML5 games where they just basically run this thing in the browser, and it's just sluggish and it doesn't respond well. And you can tell it's not a native app. So I don't recommend that approach. If you're looking for cross-platform, of course, if you're looking to build something above and beyond, something more complicated like that Draw something game or Tiny Wings, you're going to probably want to look at Cocos 2D. But I'm also looking into Cocos 2D X, which is a port of Cocos 2D that actually runs on a lot of different mobile platforms. So you might want to try that. The next question, do you use Cocos 2D? Yes. Or any other physics engines. I really like Box 2D, and I'm a big fan of Cocos 2D as well as the port that allows you to run on other platforms, and that's the 2DX version, so you might want to Google that. All right, what is a reasonable price to pay a programmer to do what you just showed us how to do? I don't know. I think I have friends who do consulting. I do not, and they typically charge between $100 and $150 an hour. So I think that's kind of a normal price range, but again, I'm not certain on that. Does your company help build apps like games with a different theme, and how much would that cost? No, I haven't taken on any consulting work. I've been fortunate to have the apps that I've built kind of keep my company going, and I kind of like to do that. So I haven't taken on consulting work yet. All right, Dom May just wanted to know how one can use it in real time. Thanks for the answer. Okay, you're welcome. What is a good sprite page editor to use for productivity and ease of use? I recommend Adobe Illustrator, Adobe Photoshop that's basically everything I do as far as graphics. Going to be Adobe, and even in the book I use Adobe Fireworks because it's good for generating PNG files. It's kind of a mix between Illustrator and Photoshop, but I'll use all three of those tools. All right. Can you ever do a total step-by-step webinar for a person totally new to the process? Even more basic. Check out the book. See how it works for you. It really is the guide I wish I had 3 years ago when I knew nothing about the platform. Do I use a designer? Sometimes. I've gotten I'm not a graphic artist, but I've gotten the basics down to the point where I'm pretty proficient at doing it, but I will hire out whenever I need to do something complicated. But I'm always trying to learn how to be a better graphics and sound guy. How important is including a social component into the applications you build? I would say based on the recent purchase of Instagram. Social is very, very important. And, that app was just bought for $1 billion. That kind of is a game changer for this entire industry, that an app that generated no revenue could be evaluated at such a high dollar amount based on really the social sharing features and the following they had. So I would say it's very important, especially if you want your game to go viral. You're going to want to be able to integrate Facebook and Twitter into it as much as you can. Any experience with rapid development game engines? Any suggestions of tools that are the best? Again, I'm a big fan of Cocos 2D. The way I approach a game is once I have the idea, I'll say, can I do it using Interface Builder? Because for me, I think Interface Builder, which is the basis of this book, is just the easiest way to build games. And so many of my games, like Card Counter, are based off of Interface Builder. And like a Fast Typer is another example where I did everything within Interface Builder. And they're fun little simple games. If I need to do something more complicated and you want explosions and lots of moving sprites, I'd recommend Cocos 2D. And I know O'Reilly has some good books on that. And if you're doing physics stuff, even though I cover physics in this book, it's very basic stuff like, trying to decide if two circles collide each other and the different angles that the puck should bounce off of and that kind of thing. If I'm ever going to do anything more complicated than that, I'll use something like Box 2D. Do you have a good example of apps that are actually educational where they teach a skill along with playing a game? Where would I find? I'm going to recommend two of my own apps. Card Counter actually teaches you how to count cards in blackjack, but it's really a game. But at the end of the day, if you play it enough, you could probably make money in the casino. So that's something that would teach you a skill. And the other one I can recommend is Glowburst. And I had a school buy a few hundred copies of it. So because you can sign up for like a discounted educational program, and they get the apps for half off. So there's a school out there that has students that are extremely lucky because it seems like everyone gets an iPad over there, and they're actually loaded up with Glowburst. And so Glowburst teaches you number sequences, and it's kind of a tune-up of your brain, if you will, because you have to pop these bubbles in certain order and in ascending numeric values. So I started out as a game, but then I got asked by teachers if I would put in, a simpler thing that children could actually learn numbers with. So it was a game I wrote that I thought was fun that it didn't have the intention of being educational, but it ended up being that way, and I put some features in there. Let's see. Hi, Todd. Are you able to share your experience about game design and the importance of identity in online games with a group of folks from the MIT Communications Futures Program, Privacy and Security Group? Drop an email. Okay, not a question, but I'll certainly you can certainly hit me up again if you have any more questions. I think that's the end. You can tweet me at Todd Moore, and you can email me Todd@toddmoore.com. Thank you so much.